Ever scroll through social media and find yourself um, getting weirdly angry at someone's seemingly perfect life?
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe you've felt a pang of bitterness watching a coworker get that promotion that you were hoping for.
hmm
Well, you might have brushed shoulders with this powerful concept called resentiment.
Yeah,
Today, we're diving deep into this idea with the help of our expert to see how this feeling that's described by the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche can shape our world.
that's right. Resentment, it's uh, more than just your average run-of-the-mill bad mood.
Right.
It's like resentment's more intense, brooding cousin,
Okay.
and it comes from feeling powerless.
Hmm.
Like you're stuck and you just can't change your situation.
So instead of taking action, you just kind of stew in those negative feelings.
Exactly. And it could lead to some pretty twisted thinking. Nietzsche argued that resentment can actually make us flip our ideas of good and bad. He called this the inversion of values.
So someone who can't achieve success might start praising weakness as a virtue.
Precisely. Let's say someone is stuck in a dead-end job they hate.
Right.
Instead of searching for a new job, they might start to resent all successful people,
Hmm.
convincing themselves that wealth is inherently evil or that ambition is actually just greed in disguise.
Yeah, I think we've all seen this play out online. There are entire communities that seem to celebrate victimhood and tear down anyone who's achieved any level of success.
That's a great example of how this inversion of values plays out in the real world. It's like they're trying to drag everyone down to their level instead of striving to improve their own situation. And it's the opposite of what Nietzsche saw as a path to a fulfilling life.
Which brings us to the concept of the Übermensch, right?
Yes, this term, often translated as overman, represents Nietzsche's ideal of someone who embraces strength, creativity, and self-improvement.
Okay.
They aren't driven by resentment, but by a constant desire to create and overcome their limitations.
So how does someone driven by resentment actually behave? What are the telltale signs?
One major red flag is a tendency to blame others. Instead of taking responsibility for their own circumstances, someone with resentment will point fingers outward, looking for scapegoats.
So instead of admitting they messed up on a project, they might blame their coworkers or the system.
Exactly. And they often use moral judgments as weapons. They might twist morality to demonize the very traits that they secretly envy in others.
So assertiveness becomes aggression, ambition becomes greed, and so on.
Right. It's a way for them to feel morally superior even though they feel powerless to change their own lives.
Yeah. It's almost like a revenge of the spirit. Not a literal revenge, but a way of trying to control or punish others through guilt trips and moral grandstanding.
Exactly. It's this subtle undercurrent of negativity that can really poison relationships and even entire social movements.
Let's talk more about that. How does resentment show up in social movements? This is where it gets really interesting for me.
Nietzsche was wary of movements that were driven primarily by resentment towards those in power. While there are movements that are fueled by a genuine desire for justice and equality,
Right.
others might be more focused on tearing down the perceived oppressors rather than actually building something better.
So a movement focused solely on punishing the wealthy without offering solutions to create opportunities for everyone could be an example of resentment in action.
Precisely. And you can even see this play out in cultural narratives like in movies or books.
Like the classic trope of the rich character who's always morally corrupt, while the poor character is inherently good and pure.
That's a perfect example. It reinforces a worldview based on resentment, where success is automatically associated with something negative.
And this doesn't just happen on a large scale. It can poison personal relationships too.
Absolutely. Think about that friend who's constantly putting down your achievements or finding fault with your success. It's possible they might be struggling with their own feelings of resentment.
Yeah. That's giving me a lot to think about in terms of my own relationships. This has been really insightful. So we've talked about how to spot resentment, but what can we do about it?
That's the key question. While Nietzsche was critical of resentment, he wasn't against all critique.
So it's okay to be critical of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's about the motivation behind the critique.
Eh.
Nietzsche was concerned about critique rooted in bitterness and powerlessness.
Right.
Critique that aimed to tear down rather than build up.
So how do we avoid falling into the trap of resentment? What's the antidote?
Nietzsche's solution was self-overcoming,
Hmm.
but is more than just a catchy phrase.
Can you break that down a bit further?
It's about taking responsibility for your own life, creating your own values, and not letting resentment control you.
Mm.
But to make it more practical, We need to dig deeper into what that looks like in everyday life.
And I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear about that. This feels incredibly relevant to so many things that are happening in the world today.
It really is.
Yeah.
But let's dive into those practical steps and how we can actually overcome resentment.
All right, I'm ready to tackle this idea of self-overcoming. It sounds like a pretty powerful concept.
It is. And I think the first step is recognizing those moments when resentment starts to creep in.
Okay.
It's like catching yourself before you fall into a bad habit.
But how do we actually do that? Sometimes it feels like resentment just takes over before you even realize what's happening.
That's true. It's subtle, it's sneaky. But one helpful tool is to simply shift your focus. Instead of dwelling on what you lack, think about what you can control.
So instead of being jealous of a coworker's success, you might focus on developing your own skills and finding ways to contribute more to your team.
Exactly. It's about channeling that energy into something productive rather than letting it fester.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like taking that negative energy and transforming it into something positive.
Precisely.
Uh,
And this also ties into the idea of creating your own values. Instead of defining your worth based on what others have or haven't achieved, figure out what truly matters to you and build your life around that.
I love that idea. It takes back a sense of agency and control.
And it's a lot more empowering than letting resentment dictate your actions and emotions.
So, concretely, what are some steps our listeners can take to put this into practice?
Let's go back to that example of the envious coworker.
Okay.
Instead of stewing in resentment, why not study their path to success? What skills did they develop? What strategies did they employ?
Right.
You can learn from their experience and apply those lessons to your own journey.
That's such a good point. It turns the whole situation into a learning opportunity rather than a source of bitterness.
Exactly. It's about reframing your perspective. Another example, let's say you're frustrated with a societal issue.
Okay.
Instead of getting caught in that cycle of outrage and blame, channel that frustration into constructive action.
Like volunteering for an organization working to address that issue, or maybe even starting your own initiative.
Precisely. Ressentiment wants to keep you stuck. Self-overcoming is about finding ways to move forward. It's about creating, building, and contributing.
And it's about recognizing that you have that power to change your circumstances rather than feeling trapped by them.
Exactly. Now, I know this all sounds a bit like a pep talk, but there's real power in this shift in mindset.
I agree. And it reminds me of the Übermensch concept.
Yeah.
They're not sitting around complaining. They're out there shaping their own destiny.
You got it. The Übermensch embraces challenges and constantly seeks to push their own boundaries. It's an inspiring vision, even if it feels a bit daunting at times to achieve.
That's true. It's like trying to climb a mountain. It might seem impossible from the bottom, but with each step, you get closer to the top.
And just like with mountain climbing, there will be times when you stumble or even fall back.
So we're allowed to have those moments of weakness or frustration or even envy.
Absolutely. Those feelings are completely natural. It's what you do with them that matters.
So you can acknowledge the feeling without letting it take over.
Precisely. And that's where the tools we've been discussing come into play. Shifting your focus, channeling your energy into something productive, and reframing your perspective.
It's like building a mental toolkit to combat resentiment.
I like that analogy. And the more you use those tools, the stronger you become.
This is making me think about how we often view success in our society.
Yeah.
It's often presented as this zero-sum game where someone else's win is automatically our loss.
And that kind of thinking is fertile ground for resentment. It keeps us focused on competition and comparison rather than collaboration and individual growth.
It's like we're all on the same hamster wheel, chasing after the same limited resources instead of realizing we can actually create more.
And that's what Nietzsche was trying to challenge. He believed in the power of individual creativity and the potential for each person to forge their own path.
So instead of being threatened by someone else's success, we can choose to be inspired by it.
Exactly. We can see their achievements as proof of what's possible and use that as fuel for our own aspirations.
It's about shifting from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of abundance.
Yes. It's about believing that there's enough success to go around and that your journey doesn't have to come at the expense of others.
This is so empowering, but let's be real. Overcoming resentment isn't a one-time thing.
Right.
What happens when those moments of jealousy, bitterness, or frustration inevitably creep back in?
It's about recognizing those moments as opportunities for growth. They're like little reminders to check in with yourself.
So instead of beating yourself up for feeling those things, You can use them as a springboard to recommit to your values and to that path of self-overcoming.
Exactly. And that's ultimately what Nietzsche's philosophy is all about. It's about embracing the fullness of life with all its challenges and triumphs and striving to become the best version of yourself.
This has been such a rich conversation, but before we wrap up, I'd love to hear any final thoughts you have for our listeners.
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that overcoming resentment is a journey, not a destination.
And it's a journey that's worth taking, even if it's not always easy.
Absolutely. And I'd encourage everyone listening to reflect on where they might be seeing resentment playing out in their own lives.
And to think about what they would build, what they would create if they weren't held back by that resentment.
Those are powerful questions,
Mhm.
and I think the answers might surprise you.
Wow, what a journey this deep dive has been. I feel like we've unpacked so much about this concept of resentment and how it can impact our lives in these subtle and not so subtle
It's
ways.
true. Resentment can be like a shadow lurking beneath the surface, influencing our thoughts, feelings, and actions.
But as we've discussed, it doesn't have to control us. By recognizing it, understanding its roots, and embracing that idea of self-overcoming, we can actually break free from its grasp.
Exactly. And that's where the real power lies. It's not about denying those feelings of resentment or pretending they don't exist. It's about recognizing them, acknowledging their presence, and then consciously choosing a different path.
It's like we've been handed a map and a compass. Now we can navigate those tricky emotional terrains with more awareness and intention.
I like that analogy. And as we become more skilled navigators, we can even start to help others find their way out of those dark, resentful forests.
So it's not just about individual growth, it's about creating a more positive and empowering environment for everyone.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most exciting aspects of this whole concept. When we start to understand and overcome resentment, we don't just change our own lives, we contribute to a more positive and constructive culture as a whole.
That's a really inspiring thought. It's like a ripple effect.
It is, and I think that's a great note to end on.
I agree. So, to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some valuable tools to navigate the complexities of resentment. Remember, that journey to self-overcoming is ongoing, but it's a journey that leads to greater freedom, fulfillment, and a more empowered life.
And who knows, maybe even a better world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.